The general's voice cut through the ceremony like a blade. "Where did you get that?" Every conversation around us stopped. Boots froze mid-step on the polished floor. I felt a dozen eyes land on my hand, the one I hadn't thought twice about that morning. The one wearing my grandfather's ring. I swallowed, suddenly aware of the weight of it. It was my grandfather's, sir. The general didn't blink. His face had gone pale in a way I had only ever seen once before in a combat zone when something went very, very wrong. "What was his name?" he asked quietly. I told him. And just like that, the room shifted. Not loud, not dramatic, just different. Like the air itself had tightened. The general straightened to his full height. "You'll report to my office after this," he said. Then, softer, almost to himself, I thought he was gone without anyone left. I stood there in my dress blues, heart pounding, wondering how a man my own family barely showed up to bury could make a general react like that. 3 days earlier, I had stood in a very different kind of silence. The cemetery sat on the edge of Columbus, Ohio, tucked behind a row of aging oak trees that hadn't quite leafed out yet. It was the kind of place people forgot about until they needed it. Quiet, modest, honest. There were no crowds, no long line of cars, just me. I remember looking over my shoulder one last time before the service began, half expecting, half hoping to see my parents' car pulling in late. My mother had always been late. My father would have complained about the drive, but he would have come. But the road stayed empty. The funeral director cleared his throat gently. "We can begin whenever you're ready." I nodded, though I didn't feel ready. I don't think anyone ever is not really. The casket was simple. My grandfather wouldn't have wanted anything fancy. He had never been that kind of man. He lived in a small house on the outskirts of town, fixed things instead of replacing them, and wore the same jackets year after year until the fabric softened with age. To my family, he had been background noise, a responsibility, something to manage. To me, he had been the only one who ever listened. "I'm sorry, it's just me," I said quietly, stepping closer to the casket. I wasn't even sure who I was apologizing to, him or myself. The minister read a few words. Standard, respectful but impersonal. He didn't know my grandfather. There hadn't been much to tell. No one had offered him stories. No one had even tried. When it was time, I stepped forward alone. "I guess I'm the one who talks now," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "You never really liked attention anyway." The breeze picked up slightly, rustling the leaves above us. For a second, it almost felt like an answer. I took a breath. "He fixed my bike when I was 10, I said. Didn't say much while he did it, just showed me how to hold the wrench, told me to watch closely." I smiled faintly. I didn't understand then, but "I think you were teaching me more than just how to fix a chain." I paused, glancing again at the empty rows of chairs behind me. "They should have been here," I said, softer now. "You deserved that." The words hung there heavier than I expected. But there was no one to argue with me, no one to defend their absence. Just silence. When the service ended, the workers moved forward to lower the casket. I stood there, hands at my sides, until it disappeared from view. And then I realized something that hit harder than I was ready for. I was the only one left to remember him. His house still smelled like him. Old wood, coffee, a faint trace of engine oil that never quite washed out of his hands, no matter how many times he scrubbed them. I let myself in with the spare key he'd hidden under the same loose brick for as long as I could remember. He used to joke that if someone really wanted to break in, a key wouldn't stop them anyway. "Better to trust people until they give you a reason not to," he'd said once. I wasn't sure my parents had ever agreed with that. The place was quiet, too quiet. I moved through it, slowly touching things without really thinking. The back of a chair, the edge of the kitchen counter, the old radio he kept by the window. Everything was exactly where he'd left it. Like he might walk back in at any moment. But he wouldn't. I opened the small wooden box on his dresser almost without thinking. I had seen it 100 times, but he'd never made a big deal about what was inside. It wasn't locked. Inside were a few photographs, a folded flag, and the ring. I picked it up carefully. It wasn't flashy, no bright stones or polished shine, just a solid band worn smooth in places with markings I didn't recognize etched along the side. It didn't look like anything special, at least not to anyone who didn't know better. I turned it over in my fingers, feeling the weight of it. "Guess this is coming with me," I murmured. There wasn't anyone else who would take it. I called my parents that night. They didn't even send flowers, I said, pacing the small living room. Not even a card. My mother sighed on the other end. We talked about this. Your father has work, and it's a long drive. He raised you, I cut in my voice sharper than I intended. He deserved more than an excuse. There was a pause. Well, she said finally he wasn't exactly easy either. I closed my eyes. That was how they justified it. Always had been. He was quiet, distant, not expressive enough. So they filled in the blanks with their own assumptions. He wasn't what you think, I said. You didn't really know him, she replied. Neither did you, I thought, but I didn't say it out loud. Instead, I looked down at the ring now sitting on my coffee table. I'm going back to base tomorrow, I said. Already, she asked. Yeah. Another pause. Well, drive safe. That was it. No mention of the funeral, no second thoughts. Just done. The morning I left, I slipped the ring onto my finger without thinking too much about it. It fit. Not perfectly, but close enough. I adjusted it once, then let my hand fall to my side. I didn't know why I was keeping it. Maybe because it was the only thing no one else had claimed. Maybe because it felt wrong to leave it behind. Or maybe because deep down I knew it mattered. I just didn't know how much. Not yet. The general's question stayed with me long after the ceremony ended. Where did you get that? It echoed in my mind as I stood outside the hall at Marine Corps Base Quantico, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the pavement. Marines moved past me in quiet clusters, their voices low respectful. No one lingered too long. Except me. I kept my hand at my side, but I could feel the ring like it had its own pulse. Heavy, warmer than it should have been. I turned it slowly with my thumb. Same worn edges, same faint markings I still couldn't quite make out. And yet somehow, not the same. The drive back to base housing had been uneventful, but my thoughts weren't. I hadn't expected anything to come from wearing it. Truth is, I hadn't even thought much about it at all when I slipped it on that morning. It had just felt right. Now I wasn't so sure. The general's reaction wasn't confusion, it wasn't curiosity. It was recognition. That unsettled me more than anything. Later that evening, I sat alone at my small kitchen table, a cup of coffee growing cold in front of me. The overhead light buzzed faintly, the kind of sound you only notice when everything else is quiet. And everything felt very quiet. I pulled the ring off my finger and set it in the center of the table. For a long time, I just stared at it. What are you? I murmured. The markings along the side caught the light differently now. I leaned in closer, narrowing my eyes. They weren't decorative. They looked deliberate. Like they meant something. I reached for my phone and snapped a picture, zooming in on the engraving. Still nothing I recognized. No initials, no dates, no obvious insignia. Just lines, patterns, codes maybe. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. My grandfather had never worn anything flashy. Not watches, not jewelry, not even a proper suit most days. And yet he'd kept this. Worn it enough to smooth the edges. Kept it close. Why? I thought about calling my parents again. Then I thought better of it. They'd already made it clear how much or how little this meant to them. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something. So I did the next best thing. I opened my laptop. An hour later, I had more questions than answers. I tried every combination I could think of: military rings, special forces, insignia, custom engravings. I even pulled up images of United States Navy SEALs rings, comparing shapes and designs. Nothing matched. Most of what I found online was ceremonial: graduation rings, unit rings, recognizable, documented. This wasn't that. This was something else. I closed the laptop with a soft click. Of course you didn't make it easy, I muttered. That sounded like him. I remembered something then. The wooden box. It was still sitting in my duffel bag, tucked beneath a folded uniform. I'd packed it almost without thinking when I left his house, along with a few photographs and that folded flag. I pulled it out now and set it on the table. Same worn wood, same simple latch. I opened it carefully. Inside, everything was exactly as I'd left it. The photographs first. I picked one up. It was old edges, slightly curled. My grandfather stood beside a truck I didn't recognize, younger than I'd ever seen him. His expression was the same, though calm, unreadable. There was someone else in the background, half out of frame. I frowned, bringing it closer. The face wasn't clear, but the posture, the stance, it felt familiar somehow. Military, maybe. I set the photo aside and reached for the folded flag. It was neatly pressed triangle crisp, the fabric still carrying that faint scent of storage and time. I held it for a moment, then placed it gently back. That left one thing. A small envelope I hadn't paid much attention to before. It was plain, no stamp, no address. Just one word written across the front in careful, steady handwriting. Keep. I felt my throat tighten. He'd meant for someone to find this. For me to find it. I slid my finger under the flap and opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper, and a second smaller object wrapped in tissue. I unfolded the paper first. The handwriting was the same as the envelope. Simple, direct. If you're reading this, it means I didn't get the chance to explain things the right way. I swallowed my eyes, moving slowly across the page. There are parts of my life I chose not to share. Not because I didn't trust you, but because some things are better carried quietly. That sounded exactly like him. The ring isn't just a keepsake, it's a key. Not one you use on a door, but one that opens conversations most people will never have. My hand tightened slightly around the paper. A man may recognize it, if he does listen to him, and don't let anyone else decide what it means. I exhaled slowly. So the general hadn't just noticed it. He'd known it. I looked at the last line. You don't owe anyone an explanation, not even family. I set the letter down, my mind racing. Then I reached for the small object wrapped in tissue. Carefully, I unwrapped it. Inside was a second ring. This one different. Less worn, sharper edges, a darker finish. And on its face, barely visible unless the light hit it just right, was a symbol. I leaned closer. It wasn't something I recognized from any official insignia. But it carried weight. Authority. Finality. I sat back, both rings now in front of me. My grandfather hadn't just left me a memory. He'd left me something unfinished. The next morning I stood outside the administrative building, both rings in my pocket. The general had told me to report, and now I understood why. I adjusted my uniform, taking a steady breath. I wasn't sure what I was about to walk into. But for the first time since the funeral, I felt something shift inside me. Not confusion. Not grief. Something steadier. Purpose, maybe. I stepped forward and opened the door. The door closed softly behind me, but the sound carried. It always does in buildings like that, old walls, high ceilings, everything echoing just a little longer than you expect. I stood there for a moment, letting my eyes adjust, taking in the quiet order of the place. Framed commendations lined the hallway. Names, dates, operations I recognized and others I didn't. The kind of history that never makes it into headlines but shapes everything underneath. A young lieutenant sat behind a desk near the end of the corridor. He looked up as I approached. "Ma'am," he said, standing, "the general is expecting you." I nodded. "Thank you." He gestured toward a closed door. No nameplate, just a small brass number. That felt intentional. I walked down the hallway, each step measured, not rushed, not hesitant. Just steady, the way I'd been trained. "Enter." The voice came before I knocked. I paused, then pushed the door open. The office was simple, larger than most, but not extravagant. A desk, a couple of chairs, a bookshelf with neatly arranged binders, and a few framed photographs turned just slightly away from the door. The general stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back. He didn't turn right away. "Close the door," he said. I did. Only then did he face me. Up close, the lines on his face were more visible. Not just age experience, the kind that settles in after decades of decisions most people never have to make. "At ease," he said. I relaxed my posture slightly. His eyes dropped to my hand. "The ring," he said. I slipped it off and held it out. He didn't take it immediately. Instead, he studied it from a distance, like he already knew what he would see but needed to confirm it. Finally, he stepped forward and took it carefully, turning it between his fingers. "Where did you say you got this?" "My grandfather, sir." "And his name?" I told him again. This time he closed his eyes briefly. Not long. Just enough. I served with a man who spoke about him once, he said quietly. Didn't use his real name. None of them did. But the description... He shook his head slightly. It matches. I felt something tighten in my chest. What kind of description? I asked. He looked up at me. The kind you don't forget. He set the ring down on his desk and walked around it slowly as if organizing his thoughts. Your grandfather, he began, was part of something that doesn't officially exist. I didn't respond. You don't interrupt a general, and you don't interrupt when someone is about to change your understanding of everything. They operated alongside units like the United States Navy SEALs, he continued, but they weren't listed under any command you could find in a public record. Black operations? I asked carefully. He gave a slight nod. Deeper than that. The room felt smaller all of a sudden. He was known for two things, the general went on: precision and silence. That didn't surprise me. It fit. He completed missions most teams wouldn't even attempt, he said. And when he came back, he didn't talk about them. Not to his superiors, not to his peers, certainly not to his family. A faint, almost sad smile touched his face. Men like that don't need recognition. They carry their own. I looked down at the ring on his desk. And this? I asked. He picked it up again. This, he said, isn't a decoration, it's a marker. A marker for what? For those who know, he replied simply. That didn't feel like enough of an answer. But it felt like the only one I was going to get. I reached into my pocket. There's something else, I said. His eyes sharpened. I placed the second ring on the desk beside the first. For the first time since I'd walked in, he looked unsettled. He didn't touch it right away. Where did you find that? He asked. In a box he left behind, with a letter. The general stared at the second ring for a long moment before finally picking it up. His hand was steady, but his expression wasn't. I haven't seen one of these in a long time, he said. What is it? He exhaled slowly. Authority. I frowned. That's not very specific, sir. It's not meant to be, he replied. He set both rings down side by side. The first ring tells people your grandfather belonged, he said. The second, he paused, the second tells them he mattered. I let that sink in. All those years, I said quietly, and no one knew. The general's gaze shifted to me. Are you sure about that? I thought of my parents. The empty chairs at the funeral. The excuses. If they did, I said, they didn't act like it. He nodded once as if he understood more than I had said. Sometimes people choose not to see what's in front of them, he said. It's easier that way. He moved back toward the window, looking out across the base. I was a young officer when I first heard his name, he said. Not from a report, from another man who owed him his life. I stayed silent. He said your grandfather walked into a situation that was already lost, the general continued. No backup, no guarantee he'd make it out. What happened? I asked. The general's reflection in the glass didn't move. He made sure everyone else did. A quiet settled over the room. And him? I asked. The general finally turned. He always did. I felt a strange mix of pride and something heavier. Regret, maybe. Not mine. Theirs. My family didn't even come to his funeral, I said before I could stop myself. The words hung there. The general didn't react right away. When he did, his voice was calm. Then that's something they'll have to live with. He stepped back toward the desk and slid the rings toward me. Keep them, he said. I wasn't planning on giving them up. A faint hint of approval crossed his face. Good. I picked them up, closing my hand around both. They mean something now, I said. They always did, he corrected gently. You just didn't have the context. I stood there for a moment, unsure if I was dismissed. The general seemed to read it. There's one more thing, he said. I waited. If anyone else asks about those rings, he said, you don't owe them an explanation. I thought of the letter. You don't owe anyone an explanation, not even family. I nodded slowly. Yes, sir. When I stepped back out into the hallway, everything looked the same. Same walls, same framed history. But I didn't feel the same. I reached into my pocket and felt the rings again. Not just metal anymore. Not just something left behind. Something earned. Something carried forward. And for the first time since I'd stood alone at that grave, I didn't feel like I was the only one remembering him. I didn't go straight home. I sat in my car for a long time with the engine off, the late light fading across the windshield, both rings resting in my palm. The bass moved around me in its usual rhythm, vehicles passing, boots on pavement, distant voices carrying and fading, but it all felt slightly removed, like I was watching it from just outside myself. All those years I murmured, closing my fingers around the metal, and you never said a word. That sounded like him. Quiet, steady, never explaining more than he had to. I leaned back in the seat and let out a slow breath. The general's words kept circling in my head. He belonged, he mattered. I had spent most of my life thinking my grandfather had been overlooked. Now I was starting to understand he had been something else entirely. That night I spread everything out on my kitchen table. The wooden box, the photographs, the folded flag, the letter, the 2 rings. I turned the second ring under the light again, studying the symbol etched into its face. It wasn't decorative, it wasn't meant to impress. It was meant to be recognized. But only by the right people. I reached for the photographs next. There were only a handful. My grandfather had never been one to collect memories on paper, but now that I looked closer, I noticed something I hadn't paid attention to before. He was never the center of the frame. Always slightly off to the side. Partially turned away, as if he had made sure he couldn't be easily identified. I picked up the photo of him by the truck again. This time I focused on the figure in the background. Same posture, same stance I had noticed before. Military. But not standard. There was something about the way he held himself, alert but controlled, not rigid, not casual. Trained. I set the photo down slowly. You weren't just quiet, I said under my breath, you were careful. The letter lay where I had left it, the words still fresh in my mind. If a man recognizes the ring, listen to him. I had. And now I knew more than I ever had before. But it raised a different question. Why leave it to me? Why not tell someone sooner? I sat back staring at the ceiling for a moment. Maybe he had tried. Maybe no one had listened. The next day I called home again. This time my father answered. Hey, he said, his tone neutral. You back at base? Yeah. A pause. How was the service, he asked. The question landed heavier than I expected. You really want to know, I replied. Another pause. Look, he said, clearing his throat. We already talked about why we couldn't make it. I wasn't asking about that, I said. I was asking if you wanted to know how it felt. Silence. Then quietly, go ahead. I took a breath. It felt empty, I said, because it was. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I stood there by myself, I continued, said goodbye by myself, watched them lower him into the ground by myself. My grip tightened on the edge of the table. And I kept waiting for you to show up. He didn't respond. I kept thinking maybe you'd walk in late, I said. Make a comment about traffic, or the weather, something. Still nothing. But you didn't. I let the silence sit there this time. Finally he spoke. He wasn't easy, he said. You know that. I closed my eyes. That's not an answer. It's the truth, he replied a little more firmly now. He didn't talk. He didn't share. Half the time it felt like he didn't even want us around. I looked down at the rings in front of me. You ever think there might have been a reason for that, I asked. What kind of reason, he said. I hesitated. The general's voice echoed in my mind. You don't owe anyone an explanation. But this wasn't about owing. This was about understanding. Do you know what he did before he retired, I asked. He worked on engines, my father said without hesitation. You've seen the garage. No, I said quietly, before that. Another pause. He never said, my father admitted. Did you ever ask? A longer silence this time. I figured if he wanted us to know, he would have told us. I let out a slow breath. He was part of something you wouldn't understand, I said finally. That got his attention. What does that mean? It means, I said carefully, that he wasn't just some quiet old man fixing things in his garage. I could hear the shift on the other end of the line. What are you talking about? He asked. I'm talking about the fact that a general recognized something he left behind, I said, and reacted like it mattered. My father didn't speak right away. When he did, his voice was different. Recognized what? I looked down at the ring. This, I said. We agreed to meet. Not right away. Schedules, distance, life, it all still existed. But there was something else there now. curiosity, maybe even a little regret. After the call, I sat there for a long time. I hadn't told him everything. Not about the second ring. Not about the letter. Not about the look on the general's face. That felt earned. Something my grandfather had chosen to pass down. Something I wasn't ready to hand over yet. I picked up the first ring again, sliding it back onto my finger. It settled into place like it belonged there. Then I picked up the second one and held it for a moment before placing it back in the box. Not hidden. Just protected. For now, I said softly. Later that evening, I stepped outside. The air was cooler, the sky just starting to darken. Lights flickered on across the base, one by one, steady and predictable. I thought about the man I had buried. The man my family thought they knew. The man I was only just beginning to understand. You really didn't make this easy, I said with a faint, tired smile. But maybe that had been the point. Not everything worth knowing comes easy. Some things have to be earned. And now for the first time I felt like I was standing at the beginning of something. Not the end. I met my parents the following Saturday at a diner off Route 40, the kind of place that had been there longer than most of the strip around it. Brown vinyl booths, coffee that never quite stopped pouring, waitresses who called everyone Han whether they knew you or not. It was neutral ground. I didn't want to do this in their house where everything turned into old patterns before anyone noticed, and I didn't want to do it at my grandfather's place where the walls still felt like they belonged to him. My mother was already seated when I walked in. My father stood near the register, hands in his jacket pockets, looking like a man who had agreed to something before he had fully decided whether he wanted to be there. When he saw me, he gave a small nod. No hugs, no easy smiles. That was fine. I slid into the booth across from them and set the wooden box on the table between the sugar caddy and the napkin dispenser. My mother looked at it first. "What's that?" she asked. "Something Grandpa left behind," I said. A waitress came over, poured coffee, asked if we needed time with the menus. None of us had opened them. "We're fine," my father said. When she walked away, the quiet returned. I rested my hand on the box. I met with a general after the ceremony. That got both their attention. My mother frowned. "A general?" "He saw Grandpa's ring," I said, "the one I wore." My father leaned back slightly, and he recognized it. No one spoke. I opened the box slowly and took out the first ring, setting it on the table. Then I placed the second one beside it. My mother stared. There were two. "Yes." "Why didn't he ever show us these?" she asked. I looked at her for a moment before answering. Maybe because no one ever stayed still long enough to ask him anything that mattered. She blinked at that hurt crossing her face. I didn't enjoy that, but I didn't take it back. My father picked up the first ring, carefully turning it in his fingers. "So what did this general say?" I folded my hands. "He said Grandpa was part of something that doesn't officially exist. He said he worked alongside SEAL teams, but not in anything you'd find in public records." My mother let out a small breath. "That can't be right." "It is." "How would you know?" my father asked. "Because the general knew his name." That landed. I could see it in the way my father's shoulders shifted, in the way my mother's eyes dropped to the table. "He said other men owed Grandpa their lives," I continued. "He said Grandpa was known for precision and silence, that he went into situations other people wouldn't touch and made sure others came home." The waitress returned with our coffee refill and took one look at our faces before backing off without asking. When she was gone, my mother said quietly, "He never told us any of that." "No," I said, "he didn't." My father set the ring down. "Then, how were we supposed to know?" I leaned forward. "You weren't supposed to know everything I said, but you were supposed to know he mattered." His jaw tightened. "That's not fair." "No," I asked. "He was alone at the end, Dad." My mother looked away. I kept going because now that the truth had started moving, I couldn't stop it. He died in that little house with almost no one checking on him. I buried him by myself. There were empty chairs where his own family should have been. And now I'm sitting here finding out that men at the highest levels of the military still remember him with respect. My voice never got loud. That made it hit harder. "You didn't have to know the details of his service," I said. "You just had to show up." My father stared at the table, not me. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then my mother spoke, her voice thinner than usual. "He made it hard." I looked at her. "In what way?" He shut down, she said, after your grandmother died especially. But even before that, you'd ask a question and he'd give you half an answer. You'd try to help and he'd say he didn't need it. You'd invite him over and sometimes he wouldn't come. I let her speak. It felt like he had already decided we weren't close, she said. After a while, she swallowed. After a while, it was easier to stop trying. I believed that she believed it. That didn't make it right. Do you hear yourself? I asked gently. You're describing a man who was damaged, private, proud, and aging, not a man who deserved to be abandoned. That one hit my father. He lifted his head sharply, and I saw it in his face before he spoke. We didn't abandon him, he said. I held his gaze. You missed his funeral. That ended the argument before it could begin. My father exhaled through his nose and leaned back. Not angry now, just tired. I told myself I'd visit the next week, he said after a while. Then something came up. Then another week passed. Then more time. It got harder to explain. There it was. The truth people actually lived with. Not cruelty exactly, just neglect dressed up as postponement. My mother dabbed at one eye with a napkin. I kept meaning to call more. I nodded once, I know. And I did know. That was the worst part. Most family failures didn't come from one monstrous act. They came from 1,000 smaller omissions. I reached into the box and took out the letter. I didn't hand it to them. I just held it. He left this with the rings, I said. He wrote that some things were better carried quietly, that if someone recognized the ring, I should listen, and that I didn't owe anyone an explanation, not even family. My father looked at the letter like it might accuse him by name. Did he mean us, he asked. Yes, I said. No one disputed it. Outside the diner window, a truck rumbled past. Somewhere near the kitchen, dishes clattered. Life kept moving the way it always did, even when yours had stopped at one hard truth. My mother looked at the rings again. So he really was. She couldn't quite finish it. A lot more than any of us knew, I said. My father nodded slowly, almost to himself, and he took it all to the grave. I thought about that. Then I shook my head. No, I said. He left enough for someone willing to carry it. That was the first moment either of them looked at me differently that day, not like a daughter talking back, not like the youngest person at the table, like someone standing in the gap they had left open. My coffee had gone cold, but I drank it anyway. For the first time since the funeral, I could feel their guilt settling in, not performative, not dramatic, just real, heavy, late. And later not, it was a beginning. We didn't say goodbye in the diner so much as we ran out of things we could say without breaking something further. My father paid the bill. My mother hugged me at the door a little tighter than usual, like she wasn't sure when she'd get another chance to do it right. I nodded to my father, and he nodded back. No promises. Just an understanding that something had shifted. Outside, the sky had turned that soft gray you get before rain. I stood by my car for a moment, letting the air settle around me. Late, I said quietly, but not nothing. They came to the house 2 days later. My grandfather's place. I had driven out early that morning, unlocked the door and opened the windows to let in fresh air. It didn't change the smell, much old wood and coffee and thyme, but it softened the edges. I set the wooden box on the kitchen table next to 3 chairs. When I heard their car pull into the gravel driveway, I didn't rush out to meet them. I stayed where I was. Let them come in. The door opened slowly. Hello, my mother called, her voice uncertain, in a way I hadn't heard since I was a kid. In the kitchen, I answered. They stepped inside like they were entering a place that didn't belong to them anymore. My father paused just past the doorway, looking around as if he expected everything to be different. It wasn't. That was the point. He kept it the same, my father said quietly. He always did, I replied. We stood there for a second, the 3 of us, with all the years between us and all the things we hadn't said yet. Then I pulled out the chairs. Sit, I said. They did. I opened the box and took out the rings first, placing them side by side on the table. My mother watched them like they might move on their own. That's the one you wore, she asked. I nodded. And the other, my father asked. He left it wrapped in the box, I said, with the letter. I handed the letter to my father this time. He hesitated before taking it, like he understood that whatever was written there might not be easy to carry. Read it out loud, I said. He looked up at me surprised. Why? Because he didn't say things out loud when he had the chance, I said. We're not making that mistake again. My father studied my face for a moment, then unfolded the paper. His voice was steady at first. If you're reading this, it means I didn't get the chance to explain things the right way. By the second paragraph, it wasn't as steady. My mother covered her mouth with her hand as he read the line about carrying things quietly. When he reached the end, "You don't owe anyone an explanation, not even family," he stopped and stared at the page for a long time. Then he folded it back up carefully like it might fall apart if he rushed. He knew, my mother whispered. Knew what I asked. That we didn't understand him, she said. That we never really tried. I didn't answer. Some things don't need help landing. We walked through the house together after that. It wasn't a tour, more like a reckoning. The garage first. My father ran his hand along the workbench, tracing the grooves worn into the wood from years of use. Tools hung in neat rows, each one in its place. He taught me how to change a tire here, my father said almost to himself. I forgot about that. You didn't forget, I said. You just stopped thinking about it. He didn't argue. My mother stood by the old radio, touching the dial gently. He used to listen to this every morning, she said. Same station, same time. You used to complain about it, my father added. She gave a small, sad smile. I remember. We moved into the living room. The chair by the window sat exactly where it always had, angled just enough to catch the afternoon light. A book lay on the side table, a bookmark still tucked between the pages. My mother picked it up, her fingers brushing the edge. He never finished this, she said. No, I replied. He didn't get the chance. The words settled over us like dust. Back in the kitchen, I set the rings down again. This is what the general said, I told them. The first ring shows he belonged, the second shows he mattered. My father nodded slowly. We treated him like he didn't belong anywhere. And like he didn't matter, my mother added, her voice breaking. I didn't soften it. That's true, I said. They didn't push back this time. They sat with it. We drove to the cemetery together that afternoon. Same road, same quiet turn past the trees, same modest gate. But this time there were 3 of us. We walked up to the grave in silence. The ground had settled a little since I'd been there last. The temporary marker stood firm, his name carved clean and simple. My mother stepped forward first. I'm sorry, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I should have come. My father stood beside her, hands clasped in front of him. I thought I had more time, he said. I kept putting it off. I won't do that again. He looked down at the ground, then at the name. You deserved better from me. I stayed a step back, letting them have that moment. It wasn't mine to take, but it was mine to witness. After a while, I stepped forward and placed the first ring on the top edge of the marker just for a second. Then I picked it back up and slipped it onto my finger. I'm keeping this, I said. Not because it's valuable, because it's his. I held up the second ring, turning it once in the light. And this, I added, I'll carry until I understand what to do with it. My father nodded. You will. Not if. Will. That mattered. We stood there a little longer. No speeches this time, no formal words. Just presence. It didn't fix everything. It didn't erase what had already happened. But it changed what came next. A small thing. But real. And when we pulled into the driveway, my father didn't go straight inside. He stood there for a moment, looking at the house like he was seeing it and the man who had lived in it for the first time in years. Wish I'd asked more questions, he said quietly. I looked at him. You still can, I said. He frowned. How? I tapped my chest lightly. By the way you live now. He held my gaze for a second, then nodded. Not fully understanding yet, but trying. That night after they left, I sat alone at the kitchen table again. The house was quiet, but it didn't feel empty anymore. I placed the second ring back in the box, then closed it gently. For now, I said, some things take time. And for the first time, time didn't feel like something we had wasted. It felt like something we might still use well. The house felt different after they left. Not louder, not brighter. Just settled. Like something that had been out of place for a long time had finally been put back where it belonged. I stayed at my grandfather's kitchen table that night longer than I needed to. The same table where he used to sit with his coffee, looking out the window like he had nowhere else to be. I set the wooden box in front of me and opened it one more time. The second ring rested inside quiet and patient. For now, I said again, though this time it felt less like uncertainty and more like respect. Some things weren't meant to be rushed. The next morning I woke up earlier than I had in weeks. Old habits, military life doesn't let go of those easily. I made coffee the way he used to, strong, simple, no shortcuts. I even used his old mug, the one with the chipped handle he never bothered to replace. I sat by the window. Same chair, same view. Different understanding. You didn't need anyone to see it, I said quietly. You just needed to know. That was the part I hadn't fully grasped before. All those years I had thought he was small because he lived small. But he hadn't. He had lived deliberately. There's a difference. I drove back to base later that afternoon. Life didn't pause just because you finally understood something important. Orders still came in, schedules still filled up, responsibilities still waited. But I carried something new with me. Not just the rings. Perspective. A few days later, I received a short message through official channels. No details. Just a time, a location, and a name I recognized. The general. I stood outside his office again, but this time I didn't hesitate before knocking. Enter. Same voice, same calm authority. But I felt different walking in. More grounded. More certain. He looked up as I stepped inside. At ease, he said, then studied me for a moment. You've been thinking. Yes, sir. Good. He gestured toward the chair this time. Sit. I did. He rested his hands on the desk. I won't take much of your time. I just wanted to make sure you understood what you've been given. I nodded. I think I'm starting to. That's enough, he said. Understanding doesn't come all at once. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a small folder, sliding it across the desk. What's this? I asked. Nothing classified, he said. Just acknowledgement. I opened it carefully. Inside were a few documents, old, official, redacted in places. But not all. There was my grandfather's name. There were dates, operations, and one line that stood out more than anything else. Commended for actions above and beyond standard operational expectations. Individual declined formal recognition. I felt my throat tighten. He turned it down, I asked. The general nodded, every time. Why? The general leaned back slightly. Because for some men the work is the point, not the credit. I closed the folder gently. That sounded exactly like him. I also wanted to tell you something else, the general said. I looked up. Men like your grandfather don't just disappear, he said. They leave an impression. On people, on decisions, on outcomes you'll never fully see. I listened. You're part of that now, he added. I frowned slightly. Because of the rings. Because of what you choose to do with what you know he corrected. That stayed with me. When I left his office, I didn't go straight back to my quarters. I walked. Across the base, past the training fields, past the buildings I had passed 100 times before without really looking at them. Everything felt the same. But I didn't. That evening I called my parents again. Not because I had to. Because I wanted to. My mother answered this time. Hi, she said, a little unsure. Hey. A pause. Then your father's here. I figured. He picked up on the other line. Hey, he said. We weren't fixed. But we were trying. I met with the general again, I told them. And my father asked. He gave me some documents, I said. About Grandpa, not everything, but enough. My mother's voice came through softly. Was he what you said? Yes. Silence. Then my father spoke. I've been thinking about him a lot this week. Me too, I said. I keep remembering little things, he continued. Stuff I didn't think mattered at the time. It all matters, I said. I know that now. We talked a little longer. Not about everything, but about enough. It wasn't dramatic. No big apologies, no sudden breakthroughs. Just steady, honest conversation. The kind we should have been having years ago. After we hung up, I stepped outside again. The sky was clear this time, stars visible above the quiet spread of the base. I slipped the first ring onto my finger and held the second one in my hand. I think I get it now, I said softly. Not everything, but enough. A week later, I drove back to the cemetery. Alone again. But not the same kind of alone. I stood in front of the grave, the grass now beginning to grow in around the edges. I told them, I said, not everything, just enough. The wind moved gently through the trees. They came back, I added. They said what they needed to say. I paused. They're trying. That felt important. I looked down at the name carved into the stone. You didn't ask for any of this, I said, but you left it anyway. I took a breath. I'll carry it the right way. Not loudly. Not for attention. Just right. Before I left, I placed my hand on the top of the marker for a moment. Then I turned and walked back to my car. No hesitation this time. No looking back. Because some things don't need to be revisited over and over to be honored. They need to be lived forward. If you've made it this far, maybe there's someone in your life you haven't fully seen yet. Someone quiet. Someone easy to overlook. Someone you keep meaning to call or visit or understand, but haven't. Don't wait. Time doesn't always give second chances, and not every story gets told out loud. Some are carried in silence. Some are passed down in small, unnoticed ways. Until someone chooses to pay attention. If this story made you think of someone, reach out to them. If it reminded you of something you've been putting off, don't put it off again. And if you believe stories like this matter, quiet ones, real ones, consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear it too. I started this alone. But I don't have to carry it that way anymore.